Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and welcome to part 2 of explaining what most of the DDR4 timings do. If you haven't watched part 1, this is going to be extremely confusing. There may or may not be a link to part 1 under the video somewhere. Anyway, let's get into it. So in part 1, we took a look at a very nice and simple read operation, just a single read burst from bank A, from row 1, 2, 3 of bank A, bank group A, and then column 12 in row 1, 2, 3. Today, what we're going to be taking a look at is 2 read bursts, which means that instead of just having to worry about our cast latency, tRCD, and command rate, we now get to worry about cast latency, tRCD, tRP, tRAS, command rate, tRTP, and tRC if you've got a Ryzen CPU. So as you can probably imagine, I'm absolutely thrilled about this part. That's sarcasm. I'm not thrilled at all because, especially like like tRP is a sensible timing. This is a timing that makes sense. I don't like the name. It stands for row precharge, if I'm not mistaken. But this is a sensible timing and it's not weird. tRAS, on the other hand, is weird. And tRC is also weird. And RTP, well, actually, RTP is very specific in terms of what it does. So basically, I hate these two. Really don't like those two. Anyway, let's get into it. So, let's just go through, I guess, the sequence of events to get our 2 read bursts complete. Because the reason why we need all these timings is because we're going to be doing a read burst from row 1, 2, 3 of bank A, bank group A, and the second read burst is going to come from row 6, 7, 8 of bank A, bank group A. This is the absolute worst case scenario. Actually, that's not true, but this is about as bad as it gets for 2, consecutive, in terms of performance, this is about as bad as it gets for 2 consecutive read bursts, because they're in the same bank, but in different rows. The only way this could be possible, the only way this could be any worse is if there was a refresh cycle between these 2 read operations, which, well, we're not going to do, that wouldn't really drastically change anything. There'd just be, a several hundred clock cycle delay in between, where is it? This command and this command. Because we'd have to squeeze the refresh cycle in between these 2. But anyway... yeah, so this is sort of worst case scenario. It requires all of these freaking timings, which is the part that I'm so annoyed about, especially tRAS and freaking tRC. If you're on an Intel CPU, you do not have tRC, so life is a bit simpler. If you're on a Ryzen CPU, you get both. I mean, one of them technically doesn't do anything depending on what the other is set to, but that's kind of the whole problem. So anyway, let's go through this. So for our first read burst, right, we just send an activate command. We activate row 1, 2, 3 of bank A, bank group A. tRCD cycles later, we send our read command to column 12. 14 cycles from that, which is TCL, we get our read data on the data queue. Because we're double, the memory is double data rate, we get 2 columns worth of data per clock cycle. So in just 4 clock cycles, we get 8 columns worth of data, right? Columns 12 through 19. And then on cycle 32, we send a precharge command. And this is where things start getting weird. No, it's not weird. It's just really, really unnecessarily complicated in my... Well, it's not... It makes sense. It makes sense that it works the way it does. I don't like the way it works. I don't like the fact that it works the way it does, because I've seen my YouTube comments section. Some of y'all ain't gonna get this, and I can't help it, because y'all stupid. Anyway, so... Precharge command. Why do we even need a precharge command, right? That's sort of the first thing we should get through is why do we need to precharge bank A before we can activate row 6, 7, 8? And the reason we need to do this is because the activate command actually destroys data. Because when you send an activate command, what basically happens is data stored in the capacitors of the memory array the capacitor, the row of capacitors in the memory array that you've specified with your activate command gets connected to the sense amplifiers. And the reason it gets connected to the sense amplifiers is that the capacitors making up the memory array are tiny. So they store very little charge, and consequently, they're really inconvenient. You kind of can't do anything with them directly. So first, we need to hook those up to some amplifiers so that we can actually get a useful signal level out of them. And also, we want to latch the values that are stored in the capacitor array. And that's the whole job of the sense amplifiers, is they literally just amplify the signals from the capacitors and latch them. In the process, the capacitors get discharged, so whatever data was stored on them disappears. This is basically a cut and paste command from the memory array to the sense amplifiers, right? Like control X row 1, 2, 3, control V sense row 1, 2, 3 into the sense amplifiers. That's basically what you're doing. So the data disappears from the memory array, which means that after we have read data from the sense amplifiers, right, we need to put the data from the sense amplifiers back into the memory array. And that's what the precharge command does. So when we send that precharge command, the sense amplifiers basically just put the data back into row 1, 2, 3. We don't need to specify a row with the precharge command because the memory chip already remembers which row we activated in the first place, right? When we send that activate command, that actually gets latched in this row address latch and decoder. So the memory chip remembers that we have row 1, 2, 3 active, and all we need to say is that we want to precharge bank A. We also have the option to precharge all of the banks, but in this scenario, we're just going to precharge bank A. We don't really need to do anything more than that. So we precharge, and now we get the tRP timing. So, that's this timing right here, which is pre to idle time. So basically, in this case, it's acting as pre to activate because we're immediately going to be sending another activate. But if we didn't have another read operation queued up, we could precharge and then just sit there and do nothing, and the memory would be idle. So anyway, we send our activate. So, we wait for tRP over here, which is 14 cycles. So from 32 to 46 is 14. So that's when we send our next activate command. Now we activate row 6, 7, 8. So we cut and paste the data from row 6, 7, 8 of the memory array into the sense amplifiers. And then we read column 23 of row 6, 7, 8 from the sense amplifiers, right? Like all of the reading actually, all of the data manipulation happens inside the sense amplifiers. And then once you're done fiddling with the data in the row, either reading or writing it, you precharge the row back into the memory array. So anyway, so we send a read command. Cast latency cycles later, we actually get data on the data bus. By cycle 77, we have all of the data for our second burst. So, we've just done 2 read bursts, which really isn't a lot of work, right? Like we've not really done a whole lot of reading here, but it took 77 clock cycles, which is why this is basically the absolute worst case scenario 2 read burst operation. Because there are other read bursts, you can do 2 read bursts with much less idle time in between the 2 actual data bursts on the data bus. But this specific scenario is horribly slow because we are doing it to the same bank. We're reading different rows in the same bank of the same bank group, right? So yeah, this is really slow. That's kind of that. It also uses basically, well, at this point, we're actually using all of our primary timings as well as some of our secondary timings, which is why the whole primary timings, the way timings are divided up in the BIOS doesn't actually make a ton of sense if you look at it long enough while understanding how all the timings work. But anyway, let's talk about why the precharge command is on cycle 32 and not, right after the read, or maybe, why is it on cycle 32? Because there is a reason for it to be on cycle 32 and not on cycle 31, not on cycle 15, not on cycle 44. And that reason in this scenario is the tRAS timing. Our tRAS is 32. tRAS describes the minimum number of clock, tRAS is basically how long the memory controller is going to wait to send a precharge command after an activate command. So with a tRAS of 32, we're telling the memory controller that if you've sent an activate command, don't send any precharge commands for the next 32 clock cycles. And so that's what the memory controller is doing here, right? Like it waits 32 clock cycles to send the precharge command. We have other timings that could have been involved here. We have like tRTP, which is the read to precharge timing, right? And we have a read command over here on cycle 14, but RTP is 8, which means we would have been trying to send that precharge command on cycle 22 when we've explicitly told the memory controller to not send any precharge commands for the next 32 cycles after an activate command. So it won't do that on cycle 22 because there's an activate command on cycle 0 and tRAS is set to 32. I also wish memory timings were like self-descriptive. Like tRAS is just the most random set of letters. Like there's probably a very good reason for why it's tRAS, but it like in terms of what it does to the commands, it's like, no, this is pretty freaking random. Anyway, so that's what's going on here, right? Is we've got that precharge on cycle 32. However, if we use the exact same timings of like, similar timings except for tRAS, so we have same tRP, same command rate, tRTP, RTP, yeah, so we have the same tRTP, same tRP, same tRCD, same TCL, same command rate, but with different tRAS and different row cycle time, which we're going to get to later. So with everything the same except tRAS, we've reduced tRAS by 11, so tRAS is now 21. Now we actually get our second read burst into like done in 67 clock cycles instead of 77 clock cycles. And the reason for this is in this scenario, the limiting factor for our precharge command isn't tRAS, it's tRTP. And the reason for this is tRAS is 21, so our activate is on 0, so we could precharge on cycle 21, except we can't because we've been explicitly told to wait 8 cycles after a read command. We've sent a read command, we have to wait for 8 cycles. I don't know why I'm considering ourselves to be the memory controller, but this way makes the most sense. Because the thing is, like, in earlier takes of this video, I was like, oh yeah, so now that you're not violating tRAS, but that's not how it works, okay? The memory controller isn't going to arbitrarily choose to ignore some timings. It doesn't do that. It basically, like, in this scenario, it literally goes and checks, has tRAS elapsed? Yes. Has tRTP elapsed? No. So we cannot send that precharge command yet. Or more like, I'm not going to send that precharge command. It could. If you set the RTP to 7, it could. But because it's set to 8, it won't. Right? It'll send it on 22 instead of 21. And if you wanted to send it on 21, you would punch in 7. And then the precharge command would be on clock cycle 21 instead of clock cycle 22. If you punch in 907, it would be on cycle 921 because it would get added to 14. Your performance would be terrible because your data would just like never ever show up. Yeah, don't do that. Anyway, if it was like 9, it would be cycle 23, right? Anyway, so I'm going to put RTP back to 8. What did I want to cover? Right. The other thing you could do if you wanted to move your precharge command to cycle 21 is you could lower tRCD. And this is why I hate this so much. So if we put tRCD 13, right, this entire block, because read and pre are connected by tRTP, this whole block gets moved from here to there. And now it's on cycle 21 again. So, yeah, and of course, if you had a tRCD of 16, we would be moving that whole block down, right? We would go from here to there, and that would consequently delay everything after it by the amount we just moved our cycle, like moved our commands by. Anyway, so that's kind of that's how, like, that's how the like precharge timing gets moved around, is basically if your tRAS is less than tRCD plus tRTP, tRTP becomes the limiting factor. Like tRCD and tRTP become the limiting factor. If your tRAS is bigger than tRCD plus tRTP, tRAS is the limiting factor for performance. And then we get to tRC. And I really don't want to, like, I want to, like, my initial idea for this video was like, oh, we're just going to talk about tRTP, tRAS, tRCD, and it's going to be nice and simple. Like, it's going to be kind of complicated, but it's not going to be too much of a mess. But now, no. tRC exists on AMD CPUs. And tRC is actually kind of important to consider because there are certain memory chips that really struggle with having activate commands hit the same bank in rapid succession. Not to be mistaken with activate commands hitting different banks or different bank groups, which is the annoying part. Actually, no, yeah, different banks is completely fine, which is the annoying thing. All right, this is the part I'm so frustrated. Like, so this is act same bank, because we have other timings for like different banks and different bank groups, and it's just like this timing doesn't actually need to exist. Like on Intel CPUs, it literally is just your tRP plus tRAS. But what this timing describes is the time from this activate command and this activate command, but only if the bank group and bank are the same. If they're not the same, then tRC doesn't do anything. It's not relevant to the scenario. So yeah, that's why I'm really not thrilled about the fact that that timing exists. Actually, speaking of that, that's also true for tRAS. Like, or really, that's kind of true for all of these timings, is like, these are all for the same bank. We have like a bunch of other timings for like different banks and different bank groups. Anyway, which we'll get to in the future. So I'm not sure why I'm so annoyed about this. Well, I still am. So the thing with this is that obviously you can basically move your... so if you're on a Ryzen CPU and you do something like this, what it does is it forces this activate. Like, actually, it'll just take this entire block and move it like that. So yeah, if your tRC is 66 and your other timings look like this, like, it doesn't matter that you've finished your pre-charge by cycle 36. You ain't sending another activate command until cycle 66. And then all of your other, all your other commands are delayed from that activate command. So yeah, and this is why so many, this is probably one of the main reasons why Samsung BDI just absolutely demolishes every other memory chip that exists, because most memory, not only do most memory chips struggle with low tRCD and low tRFC, most memory chips really struggle with low tRC. Samsung BDI can hit sub 40 tRC, even at decent clock speeds. Most memory chips don't do 40 at all. They don't even get close to 40. You're usually looking at 60 or higher. So anyway, this is bad, right? This is quite bad that we've just moved our second burst basically all the way down by 66 cycles. Anyway, so I'm just going to move that back up here. And we're going to revert tRC to... Actually, shouldn't be... No, it is 35. The funny thing with tRC in this scenario is, it's technically 35, but we're not hitting that because we're limited by... our tRAS isn't currently relevant because we're limited by tRCD plus 8, which is 22. And then plus our tRP, which is 14. So we're actually our activate command ends up on 36, which is not limited by tRC in this scenario. It's limited by tRTP. I see what I mean? This is why I hate this part. It's just there's so many different timings that are moving things around. And ultimately there's always only one of them that's actually controlling when stuff happens. But there's so many yeah, but if this one isn't whatever, then this other one is. Anyway, so that covers the tRC thing, tRTP. So we've gone over the relationship here, right? I think hopefully this makes sense. And I don't know. I've been trying to figure out how to make this not a mess, but it just is a mess as far as I'm concerned. Because it's like, well, if your tRAS is low enough, then tRAS isn't relevant. If your tRTP is too low, it's no longer relevant. If your tRC is too low, it actually also can be not relevant. Where you can, like, for example, if you're on a Ryzen CPU, what you can do is do something like this. And suddenly, the fact that most memory chips cannot do a tRC of 32 is no longer relevant, because what we have just done is we've taken our read block, right? We've taken our, we've taken all of this. Actually, is there like a custom insert rows? There isn't. Well, that's very unfortunate. But what we've done here is we've taken like all of this, right? And we've moved our tRCD from 14 to 27. So we go like that. Oops. I didn't use the I didn't use cut. So we go and move to 27, right? But not only that, we've also cranked up our pre-charge timing itself to 27. tRAS isn't relevant in this scenario. I don't know why I changed it. It could have been 21. This is why, like, why does tRAS even exist? Seriously. Actually, no, I know why it exists. On Intel CPUs, it's actually very important because you don't have a tRC timing, but, anyway, so yeah, tRAS, so like the tRAS in this scenario isn't relevant. tRP is 27, so that's our pre-charge command. So our activate command gets moved from 35 plus 27, 55, 62? Yes. Just 62? Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, so we end up with that activate on 62. Because, yeah. You know what? I feel like maybe if I hadn't put the idles everywhere, this would have been a lot more... be less hard to look at, maybe. Alternatively, what I could have done is... well, no, because then if we get to some of the other scenarios in the later parts, like this lovely thing, yeah, that... I mean, I could remove the idles from it. I don't think that would make it significantly less legible. Yeah, honestly, without the idles, this would be a lot more sensible. We're just going to remove that. Too late. I'm not reshooting this. I hate this part. I hate this part so much. I'm going to delete all of that. So now I can copy paste things around freely without worrying about it too much. I'm pretty sure you could design a calculator that would just straight up spit out exactly where... I toyed with the idea of making a little calculator that would just spit out exactly where, like, you could set a sequence of commands that you want to run, depending on what scenario you're doing. And then you could punch in the timings, and it would tell you how, like, punch in all the relevant timings, and it would spit out what would happen, like, how long everything will take to finish. Actually, this is kind of worse in some ways, almost. Anyway, but now you can see how, you know, what did I do? Right, yeah, because I cranked tRCD up to 27 and tRP up to 27. Our RTP is kind of low. My goal was, well, no, 62 is sensible. Fun fact, I actually pre-tested this before shooting this video with a Ryzen system because, like, theoretically, this is a thing. Practically, I wasn't 100% certain if the memory controller wouldn't try to do something weird, but no, this actually just, this a thing. You can do this. You shouldn't do this, because as you can see, that second read operation ends up on cycle 93, or, well, starts on cycle 90 and finishes on cycle 93, which, you know, if you hate getting your data on time, that's great. If you never want to be able to access your memory quickly, then yeah, this is totally fine. Anyway, now I should undo all of that. We're going to revert this back to the nice timings that are actually good. No, you do you know, I do kind of okay, no, what I don't get is why we even have a tRC setting on Ryzen. Because arguably what you could do is just punch in like a tRAS of, say, I don't know, because I'm thinking like micron timings, which gonna go something like this. So if we're doing you might have something like 1916, so you'd be 19 plus 8 plus 16. And then we actually, what's that? 19 plus 6. Do I care about that in this scenario? No, because that's not going to work out. This is what, like 35 with plus 8? Yeah, no, that's way too short. So what we actually want to do is we want to do 50 would be 66. If we want 62, you would do 46? Yeah. So you could do something like this, and that has the exact same effect as if you punch in 6221. Right? Like that's the same thing. So I actually just do not understand why there's a tRC timing. Like why why have more just anyway. Yeah, so that's like fun fact. If you set your tRAS super low and your tRC is really high, your tRAS literally isn't doing anything. If you set your tRC really low and your tRAS is really high, your tRC isn't doing anything, right? So actually, I think there is one scenario where tRC has an advantage over tRAS, and that is... No, because tRC doesn't care about the tRCD. Yeah, no, tRAS doesn't care about tRCD, it just cares about tRP. So no, that doesn't matter. I don't know why Ryzen bothers with the tRC register. Like, it doesn't do anything. Anyway, I'm gonna move everything back to where... Wait a minute, I think the notes got messed up. Yes, they did. Good job, me. This is great. This is truly peak YouTube content right here. 35 plus 14 is 49? Yes. Oh, I remembered the last thing we didn't address yet. Ah, hell. So the last thing I didn't address yet in this video is that to some people, it might seem really weird that, like, wait, you're firing off a pre-charge command, which is literally taking the data from our sense amplifiers, right? The data that we are reading with this read command from the sense amplifiers. Yeah, we're taking that data and putting it back into the memory array with the pre-charge command on cycle 22. Cycle 22 is before cycle 28 when the data actually comes out of the memory chip. Does this not cause issues? No, it doesn't. You can literally go into the JDEC, into like Micron's own documentation, which, fun fact, this like the command descriptions and all of that, as far as I can tell, most basically what like Micron and the other memory manufacturers do for this section of their data sheets is just copy paste the relevant portion of the JDEC specification. Because I do actually have access to some JDEC spec documents, which are very expensive. Let's just put it that way. Not that I had to pay for them, but you generally, like, getting access to those is not fun. Let's just put it that way. Well, I have access to them through manufacturers, but like they basically put the relevant portion of the JDEC documentation onto the datasheet. So this is basically JDEC specification right here. Anyway, you will notice that we have a tRTP command right here, a read command here for bank group A, column, whatever. And then we have a, RTP delay of 6. Literally, it says right there, RTP is 6. So on cycle 7 over here, right, 1 plus 6 is 7, we send our pre-charge command for bank group A, bank A, or all banks. And so we are pre-charging bank A of bank group A before the data from bank A of bank group A is on the data queue, right? Which this is the data from this read command over here because our cast latency here is 11, right? So we go from T1, T12, that's our data for this read command. We can pre-charge before the data is out of the, before the memory chip starts outputting the data. And the reason you can do this, at least as far as I can tell, is because we actually have a second there's a read buffer before the read drivers on the memory chip. So you can start pre-charging the sense amplifiers pretty much as soon as the data is in the read output circuitry. Like, once the data is moving out of the sense amplifiers, we can start pre-charging the sense amplifiers. We no longer need to worry about, like, deleting our data before it makes it out of the memory chip because it's already on the way. Like, there's a copy of the data that's on its way out of the memory chip. So what that leads to is some pretty funny timings, especially on DDR5 memory chips, because, say, Hynix DDR5 memory chips can actually do an RTP of 4, which is interesting when you consider that they have a CAS latency of like 30 to 40, meaning that you can have a read to pre-charge scenario that looks like... Actually, there's probably some DDR4 chips that can also do this, but I think most DDR4 memory controllers don't let you set the RTP that... Actually, no, Intel memory controllers should let you set the RTP incredibly low. Ryzen, I think, won't let you set it below 6. Anyway, what you could do is you could set your pre-charge command right here, even if your data, right, like if we're talking DDR4 over here, your data would be on like, so that's 14 plus 30, your data would be over here, you know? So, yeah, you can do some really, like, so the pre-charge command being rammed right up against the read command, that is actually completely fine. It just depends on the memory chip. Like, there are some memory chips where their internal circuitry might be kind of slow or something. If you set your read to pre-charge really short, yeah, it ain't going to work. It's going to corrupt your data. But on a lot of memory chips, you can set the read to pre-charge very, very low, and it's perfectly fine. So, yeah, like, that's kind of that. So at this point, I think I have covered everything that I wanted to cover in this scenario. We've talked about, like, you can put your you can ram the pre-charge command right up against the read command. That's just fine. If your if for like tRAS will stop, like whatever your tRAS timing is like the minimum is the soonest you can send a pre-charge command relative to your activate your activate command. RTP is the soonest you can send your pre-charge command relative to your read command. tRC is the soonest you can send your activate command relative to your first activate command. Which in this case, actually, no, it's 35, because this scenario is tRAS 21. I mean, we could also have a tRAS of 22, and that wouldn't change the timings, because that would land on 22, which is where the tRTP is tRTP is limiting us to, and then, you know, tRC would be like 36. I mean, well, the thing is, you could have a tRC of 10, and the thing is, it's just like this isn't relevant because your tRP and tRAS timings do not allow you to achieve a act to act of 10, right? Like, actually, yeah, this is so impossible. Like, this is so incredibly impossible because your tRCD alone will never let you do this, right? Because you would be trying to send an activate to bank group A, bank A, bank group A, and then trying to send another activate over here, and it's just like, no, you don't. Like, no. You just know. Like, there's never... Like, if your memory controller was, like, broken, it could arguably try to do something like this. Like, you could intentionally send 2 activate commands back to back to the memory chip. Like, the memory chip won't stop you from doing stupid things. But your memory controller... Like, why would you send an activate command, not read anything or write anything, right? Like, the whole point of an activate command is that you want to read or you want to write. If you don't want to read or write, why are you sending an activate command? So you send an activate command, and then you read, right? Like, so you're not, like a tRC of 10 is just not it's not achievable because you wouldn't send 2 activate commands to the same bank back to back. That's dumb. There's no reason to ever do that. There's simply no reason to ever do that. Anyway, yeah, so now I think I've, and I think I've covered everything. Hopefully this makes sense. Let me know if it makes sense down in the comments section. Yeah. Because, it makes sense to me, but I'm not sure if I'm explaining it very well, because as far as I'm concerned, this is kind of a mess. And yes, at this point, I have covered everything I wanted to cover for this part. So at this point, we've finally covered all of the primary timings, and all we've managed to do is complete 2 read bursts. And this is why we have so many memory timings, right? Is like, you want to do 2 read bursts from two different rows, and suddenly you need to you need to worry about your read to, read command to data on the data queue, activate command to your read command, how long it, well, the other stupid thing about memory timings is the order they are normally listed in. You cannot send a tRP until either tRAS or tRTP have been satisfied. I just want to point that out. Like, tRAS and tRTP should be in front of tRP. Like, order of operations wise, tRP doesn't happen before tRAS or before tRTP, right? Stupid memory. So anyway, you go, and actually tRCD is before TCL, just another. So you go tRCD, then you do TCL, then you do a tRAS and tRTP check, right? You check that you've satisfied both tRAS and tRTP. Whichever one is looser is the one that gets used. Then you run your tRP. Then you have to check if you're satisfying tRC, and then you can, then you can send another activate command. And then you get tRCD again, TCL. TRC. Oh, actually, we skipped over TCL because TCL just doesn't really interact with the rest of the commands in any way, shape, or form. It's just kind of there, determining when the data gets put onto the data bus. Because like a lot of these other commands are like most of the other commands are just about shuffling data in and out of the sense amplifiers, and then it's mostly just shuffling data back and forth between the memory array and the sense amplifiers. And then finally you have and then there's the read command, which, copies some data out of the sense amplifiers and spits it out onto the data bus. So it just kind of doesn't really interact with anything else in this scenario, in this operation. Actually, TCL never really interacts with anything. It's just kind of its own independent thing that happens in between the absolute, a mess of activate and pre-charge. And actually, that's the only other two commands that you regularly use. Yeah. Anyway, so this video has now gone completely off the rails. If it doesn't make any sense, I might reshoot part 2. I don't know. I'm so done with this. I want to move on to doing fun things instead of trying to figure out how to explain that you have way too many timing, way too many very conditional timings, because these are all if tRAS, if tRP. I mean if tRTP or if tRC, right? tRCD is not an if. tRCD is very much set in stone. tRP is set in stone. But these three, hell. Absolute hell. Also, there. That makes more sense. I'm kind of tempted to just reorder the timings in an order that actually makes sense, because, wait, yes. Oh, wait a minute. No, wait, there. And that makes sense. That is the correct order of operations for your memory timings. Yeah, this is actually command rate is special. It shouldn't be. Well, no, it is the first, this one determines how long you take to do how long you actually take to do everything. So it actually does get to be first, even though it's not the most important of the memory timings. But anyway, that's it. That's actually it for the video. I have a Patreon. There's a link to it in the description. I would really appreciate it if you check that out. There's I think the patrons get access to a shortened explanation of what all the different memory timings mean. In text, so you don't have to put up with these horribly convoluted videos. It might not be a good enough explanation though, so I don't know. Anyway, I also have a Teespring store. There's a link to that down in the description below. I recently added a new hoodie. Yeah, and there will be another hoodie that I'm still working on designing the art for. And I have a Bandcamp. There's a link to that down in the description as well. That's it for the video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.